Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for today's video, I will be talking about the Stephen King books that are written in first-person point of view. Now, this typically means a story that's written from the main character's perspective, and they're kind of narrating the story as, I did this, I said that, I thought this. So it's the main character narrating everything, as opposed to third person, which is more like, he did that, or she did that, or even second person, which is like, you did that, you did this, which is kind of weird. But today we're just talking about the Stephen King books that are written from a first person point of view. I was kind of thinking more about this because I was looking at like my top 10 list, and I was kind of thinking like, oh yeah, a lot of these are written in first person perspective. And then I kind of just glanced at my Stephen King books, and I kind of realized that most of the time he uses third person, like he did this, she did that. And there's probably a number of reasons for that. So the main reason he does this is because most of his books have multiple points of view. They have multiple main characters, which of course makes sense of why he would use third person, because it would get very confusing if he would use first person for multiple characters in a book. And a lot of the times, like I said, he has multiple main characters, and that's how he kind of develops sort of like a small town feeling in a lot of his books, something like Under the Dome or It or Needful Things, where he kind of, every chapter is a different perspective. So he usually uses third person for that kind of stuff. And then obviously a lot of his books just have so many characters' perspectives, like The Dark Tower or The Stand. So, a lot of his books just use third person instead of first person. And even a lot of my favorite books, even though they're told from just one character perspective, a lot of the times he still ends up using third person. Like Misery is told through Paul Sheldon's point of view, but that's in third person. You've also got Gerald's Game, and that's told through Jesse's perspective in third person. But I think a lot of the times, not all of the time, because I'll go through the books here, but most of the time when he utilizes first person, I end up really enjoying it. And there's kind of a trend lately where he's actually using first person more now than he has ever done. So I do like the direction that he's going with the first person. So you know what? Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So basically, I'm just going to go in chronological order. I think that'll make the most sense here. And you'll start to notice a trend of like early on in his career, he uses first person kind of sparingly, but then as you go throughout the decades, he starts to use it more and more. Also, if you get to the end of the video and you're wondering like if I've missed anything, if I did miss anything, please comment down below. I tried to be thorough about this, but of course I make mistakes. So if there's any other first person stories that I'm missing here, please comment down below. I'm pretty sure I've got all of his novels, and I'm going to include some novellas too. I did not include any short stories, because oftentimes he does utilize first person in short stories, but I'm mainly focusing on the novels and novellas. So ironically, as I was saying, I do generally love when Stephen King uses first person. The first book that he uses first person in is one of my least favorite Stephen King books of all time, and that would be Rage, which is the first published Richard Bachman novel. I have a dedicated review for this, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about why I don't really love this book, but it is the first Richard Bachman book, and it's fairly short, and he does utilize first person in the book. It's all from Charlie's point of view, and I really don't like that main character. I just don't like the story in general, but it is King's first use of first person. I know it has its fans, but as far as first person goes, I don't really think he did that well of a job with it. So Rage was published in the 70s. Now we're fast forwarding to the early 80s with Different Seasons, which is my all-time favorite Stephen King novella collection. And funny enough, 3 of these novellas in here are written in first person. You've got Shawshank Redemption, or Rita Hayworth in Shawshank Redemption. Apt Pupil is the only one that's not written in first person, even though that is one of my all-time favorite Stephen King novellas. But you've also got The Body, which is written in first person, and you've got The Breathing Method, which is one of, if not my favorite, Stephen King novellas. And that's also written in first person. So I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence that this is my favorite Stephen King novella collection. Not only are the stories great, but just the way that he decides to tell the stories in first person, I does think influence how much I love this book. And it is my favorite Stephen King novella collection. And most of the stories in here are written in first person. So this next book is kind of a weird example of Stephen King utilizing both first person and third person. It's a little jarring, but it's still a great book. And that would be Christine, which was published in 1983, I think a year after different seasons. So this book is written in 3 parts, and part 1 and part 3 are from one character perspective, and it's in first person. But part 2 is written from a different character perspective, and it's in third person. Now, I don't normally love when books do this. I love when books can kind of just have a steady flow, a steady narrative flow throughout the book. So it's kind of jarring when you jump from first person like that to third person and then back to first person. That is probably my least favorite aspect of this book, but it's still one of my all-time favorite Stephen King novels, and the first person stuff is great. The third person stuff is good too, but man, the first person stuff is excellent. So Christine was written in 1983. Now we're jumping to my birth year of 1993. And it's kind of crazy because Stephen King's most prolific decade was the 80s. So he wrote a shit ton of books, but most of them did not include first person. Now we're jumping to 1993 with Dolores Claiborne, which I recently just updated my Stephen King ranking list, and this is in my top 10. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen that video yet, but I love this book. I especially loved the audio book. And this book is technically in first person because Dolores Claiborne, she is sitting down with, in the police station, kind of narrating her life story. So it's all from Dolores Claiborne narration. She's literally speaking the whole story. So it's definitely a cool narrative style in that way. It's one of the most unique first person point of views I've ever read, and Dolores Claiborne is just one of my all-time favorite Stephen King characters. And so this book is just flat out amazing. I love it. And then a few years later in 1996, we get this gem of a book, The Green Mile. And most people have probably seen the movie, and it's funny, a lot of people don't even know that The Green Mile is a Stephen King book. But yeah, this book is kind of interesting because it was sort of like a serialized novel, and this was kind of like published in 6 parts and then later, established into a novel. And this book is written in first person. It is written from, I can't remember the guy's name, but Tom Hanks, the character, it's written from his first person point of view. And getting his point of view is pretty interesting to see, just what's happening. And it's just an overall great story. And we're starting to see King utilize first person more in the 90s. And then, just 2 years later in 1998, we get Bag of Bones, which is also written in first person. Now, when I originally read this book, I did not enjoy it. I think I gave it 2 stars, easily one of my least favorite Stephen King book, but it's one of the most Stephen King books that I'm the most excited to go back and reread, just because I've seen so many people who are avid Stephen King readers, constant readers, love this book and oftentimes put it in their top 10. I'm very interested to give it a second shot. And of course, knowing how much I love, or I usually love, Stephen King's first person point of views and just getting inside, really getting inside the head of a character, his main character, I think I will enjoy this more. I'm a little bit hesitant though, but I will definitely give it another shot one day. But yeah, it's another Stephen King first person point of view, and that's the 3rd one in the 90s. So he's starting to utilize it a bit more at this point. And now we jump forward a few years. I think this novel was written in 2007, maybe 2008. Give me a minute, y'all. Where is the damn page at? 2008. That took way too long. But yeah, I'm talking about Duma Key. So we jump forward a decade, actually, because Bag of Bones was 98. This was 2008. So he went a large portion of the 2000s, which is widely regarded as Stephen King's worst decade, even though still a lot of great books, but a lot of people say that is his worst decade. We jump forward to 2008 with a gem, underrated gem of Duma Key. I love this book. I've read it twice now. Easily one of the best Stephen King novels he ever wrote. And Edgar Freemantle, easily one of my favorite Stephen King protagonists. And I love that we get his first person point of view, especially with kind of his characteristics. That's a stupid thing to say, but like his tics and his personality and just what makes him him really comes to light in his first person point of view, especially at the start of the book, and you kind of see his progression. It's just amazing, and I wish more people would go and read this book. But yeah, it's definitely one of his best uses of first person that he's ever used. And now we come to a fan favorite, and I think this was published in 2011, and that would be 11/22/63. And while I do think this is overrated, I do enjoy the first person narrative that we get with Jake's character. And like I said before, the first third of this book is amazing. It's kind of the later half of the book that I don't enjoy as much. But yeah, it is still Stephen King utilizing first person to the benefit of the story. And I do really enjoy the character. And yeah, it's one of Stings. It's one of Stephen King's most beloved characters and books ever. So I don't think it's a coincidence that this is also written in first person. And then we jump forward a couple years in 2013 and we get Joyland, which is one of the hard case crime novels. This is probably my least favorite of the three hard case crime, but it is written in first person, and the main character, Devin Jones, is written very well. Very small, very compact little novel here, but it is fairly underrated and it's pretty good. Not much to say with it though, but I do enjoy the first person aspects of it. So this next book came out the year after in 2014, and just like Dolores Claiborne, upon a reread, it quickly rose up into my top 10 King books of all time, and that would of course be Revival. And this is an excellent example of Stephen King utilizing first person. And I think it works really well here because we start out with the character when he's very young, and then we end the book when he's a lot older. So you get a lot of progression of his life, like his whole life, and just how he captures how he thinks when he's a kid, when he's a teenager, when he's an adult, when he's an older adult. So first person was really the way to go with the story, and he does it masterfully in this book. And it's just, obviously one of my favorite King books, one of the best Stephen King endings of all time. Just an overall great experience and a perfect example of Stephen King using first person to his benefit. Next book I have is his latest novella collection, and that would of course be If It Bleeds. Now I said different seasons, 3 of those novellas had first person. Only one of them in here does, and that would be Mr. Harrigan's Phone, which is still an all-time favorite novella for me, although The Life of Chuck and Rat I do love a bit more. Mr. Harrigan's Phone is still an outstanding novella, and it's told through the first person of a young kid. I believe he's like 12 or 13. Pretty young kid, so he utilizes first person very well in this novella, so yeah, one of my favorites. And speaking of young character protagonist, the year after, because I think If It Bleeds was 2020, this next book came out later in 2021, and that would be later. I'm sure y'all are getting tired of that joke. But yeah, this book came out in 2021, and it's all through the character, God, what's his name? Jamie. His first person point of view works outstandingly in this book. It's really fun getting his first person perspective. Since he's so young, a lot of the times the adults are kind of using his ability of seeing dead people to their benefit, and it's interesting to see how those adults are kind of using him in that way. And it's fun to get his first person perspective through that lens of a child. So yeah, this book is a lot of fun, one of my all-time favorites. So like I said, a lot of these books are some of my all-time favorites. However, with his latest release, Fairy Tale, which came out last year, Oh yeah, I already said the title. Oh well, in his latest release, Fairy Tale, he does use first person for the main character, and while it does work brilliantly in the first third of the book, it's just classic quintessential King writing. The last half of this book, the last 2/3 or so, it's just not good. And the writing that we get in the first third of the book just feels absent and just not as great in the last 2/3 of the book. I do have a dedicated review for this. So if you want kind of like my just full on spoilery thoughts on this book and why I don't love it, go listen to that. But yeah, first person, chunks of it did really work in here, but chunks of it did not. But you can kind of see the trend of Stephen King utilizing first person more and more. Most of these books were written in the past 20 years or so. Like Duma Key onto Fairy Tale, a lot of it has been first person. So it'll be interesting to see his books going forward, you know, if he still continues to write, like how many of them will be in first person or if he'll stick more to third person. I don't know. Definitely earlier on in his career, you could definitely see him using third person more. Like he only has one in the 70s, two in the 80s, despite that being his most prolific decade as a writer. And then he starts to use it more in the 90s with three, and then only one in the 2000s, but like 2010s and then the 2020s, you know, he uses it a lot. So I think this is interesting. Please let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. All right, so what did you guys think? Do you enjoy Stephen King books that are told in first person, or do you typically enjoy the ones that are in third person more? Or do you just not care and you think all of his writing is good? Which most of his writing is pretty good most of the time. I just feel like most of the time when he's writing in first person, I tend to enjoy it. So please leave your opinions down in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the YouTube channel and the Bookish Drummer Discord. And if you'd like to further support me, go check out my Patreon page. I also have my Amazon wish list if you'd like to buy me a book. Thank you guys so much for watching and have a fantastic day.